Great. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank you so much, Bethany, for joining us tonight. I am extremely excited to introduce Bethany, who is a former college instructor of writing and science fiction, um, who in 2019 made the leap to the tech industry so that she'd have more time for writing. And when she is not working on her novels, and I'm reading from her bio here, so I hope it's okay that I share this. She is an introvert of predictable habits. She likes reading, cooking, fan fiction, snuggling in bed, and lives here in Buffalo, New York, which is also where I live, with her wife and her dog. Bethany did win the 2024 Philip K. Dick Award, and has been nominated for the BSFS Compton Crook Award for These Burning Stars. So again, thank you so much, Bethany, for joining us tonight. The plan that I have here, and we'll see how it goes, but I was hoping to talk a little bit first about These Burning Stars, if you're amenable, and then maybe sneak into a little preview of On Vicious Worlds before we talk about writing just in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I was telling Danny before we came on screen that this is like my favorite thing about being a writer is getting to talk to other people and particularly talk to other writers. So I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. Um, so These Burning Stars, I received as a gift for Christmas this year, and absolutely devoured. So I'm going to do my best to not completely fangirl all over the place. Uh, and I do also want to make sure that we avoid any major spoilers because I know that there are a couple people who haven't read it yet, although I'm sure that they will. Uh, but I don't think it's a spoiler to say that the characters that you've created are just so interesting, multifaceted, morally complex is I think the word that I would use, but so compelling even when they're being really terrible. I'm just curious how you craft characters like that readers can sort of sympathize with and root for, even as we're like, oh,
Yeah,
at their actions.
yeah. So I mean, I think that part of what you discover as a writer is that writing people is a labor of complexity, right? Because people are complex. And the stories that usually end up like annoying me are when the characters are really uncomplex, and they don't feel real to me. Like this is one of the interesting things that's happened with the explosion of the rhetoric of strong female characters, right? When all that actually means is that they're fully actualized, like complex human beings. That's all strong female character means, but we didn't have a vocabulary for that for so long that we use this term strong female character. So I think the fact that I write characters who are morally complex, who do horrible things, who also do good things. Sometimes I write characters who are just purely horrible because some people are just purely horrible. I think is just an effect of the fact that I'm a very psychological writer. So I'm always thinking about the psyches and the psychological backdrop of my characters. So that's what it comes out of. You know, in terms of the specific characters in this book, and you mentioned like writing characters who like are likable even though they're horrible. Um, I was doing two things there. The character that Danny's referring to is called Essek Nightfoot, and it's not giving anything away to say that she's kind of the villain of the story, and she's a horrible, dastardly person. On the one hand, I wanted to explore the phenomenon of people becoming obsessed with charismatic but horrible human beings. Like that is a thing that has happened a lot in our culture. People will follow charismatic, evil human beings to the ends of the earth. Why do we do that? Like, why is that a thing that happened? And I wanted to trick the reader into doing that. I wanted to essentially say, because, you know, we're intelligent people. We think that would never happen to us. I would never be taken in by that kind of grifter. And I wanted to play this game of like, I wonder if I could get you taken in by this grifter. And I've had so many people come back to me and say that Essek is their favorite character. They hate her, but they love her. And I found that so interesting. But then the other thing that I wanted to do, which is a big part of all of my character writing, is I wanted to have fun. Like I wanted to write a character who was fun to write. And for me, Essek was incredible. She's just awful, but she was so fun to write. And a lot of the other characters in the book who are, smart asses or deeply noble or deeply conflicted or sometimes funny and sometimes humorless. Like I enjoyed writing people like that. And so for me, I think that what makes writing worth doing is writing characters who, even when you hate them, you enjoy them. So that's kind of my take on it.
Awesome. And yeah, definitely was referring to Essek, who I didn't want to root for in any way, but I kept finding myself kind of like, wait a minute, stepping back.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's so interesting, the obsession with charismatic evil people, because I hadn't thought of that as I was reading, but now that you say it, I'm like, oh shoot, I was totally
Yeah.
taken in. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that segues really nice into something else that I wanted to ask you about, which um, These Burning Stars does not in any way shy away from powerful themes. You hit genocide, exploitation, political subjugation of people. Um, I'm curious, when you went to write, how did you navigate covering such heavy topics so gracefully? And were there ever points where you were like, maybe I shouldn't, or maybe I should do more? And just curious about
Yeah.
your approach there.
Well, it is worth mentioning that when I sat down to write this book, I had no concept of the heavy topic, the heavy subject matter that it would happen. That kind of evolved as the story evolved, and I think a big influence for that for me was when I was an academic. My scholarship focused specifically on identity and social justice movements in 20th and 21st century literature, particularly science fiction and fantasy. And science fiction has long been a very rich atmosphere in which to write about politically expedient things. And so, a lot of the topics that come up in the book are there because I think they are that in our own world, everything that we struggle with, all of our successes, all of our failures are rooted in intense political situations, and positionality of people. And so for me, it was kind of a thing I can't not do, right? Just because of my scholarly background, because of my personal background, because of the ways that I've experienced otherness and loved and cared for people who have experienced subjugation and things like that. Um, it it kind whenever I can't imagine writing a story about power structures in a universe that didn't deal with the possibilities of those structures being oppressive.
Um, and so that's really interesting. So then I think the world building that you've done is so interesting, and you created such a, I think, rich tapestry of of places and peoples, while maintaining such a strong focus on the characters. So do you think your scholarly work that enabled you to do that, or facilitated that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that what my scholarly work did was it put me in front of writers, both fiction writers and scholarly writers, who were doing the work of examining society and examining history in a way that was rich and nuanced and like restorative in the sense of like let's actually heal um, by understanding the past, and understanding how it plays into our future. And like a lot of the problems that we have as a society, I think, are because we can't seem to heal from the atrocities of the past. We just keep doing it again and again because we get hurt, so we hurt people, and that happens on an individual and a systemic level. And so the ways that I came up as a scholar, studying that content, it has been at the core of like everything that I've written before and since then. And I think it definitely equipped me. And one of the things about scholarly writing is that it's historically very obscure and obtuse and difficult to understand. And one of my charters as a scholar, being trained by the people that I was to write about these complex issues in a way that was accessible. And so I think being a scholar actually just made me a better writer of ideas than I was before. And that
Oh,
came in
that's
handy
interesting.
here.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting. And not to completely be like, I'm going to go into a whole nother
Yeah.
subject area, but I'm going to go into a whole nother subject area,
Yeah.
which is the book. You play with time a bit, jumping in and out across the timeline in a non-linear approach, and just particularly because so much of our audience are writers or aspiring writers. I'm curious how you approach structuring the narrative and what challenges it presented to approach time in a non-linear fashion.
Yeah. I mean, so the book is very much about history. It's about the long, and again, this is not a spoiler, it's about the long-term impacts of a genocide, right? Decades, almost a century later. So the book is very much about history. And then the moment that the story is taking place is a moment that has happened as a result of a ton of things that happened before it in the lives of the main characters. And one thing I would say about writers is that we love a flashback. We love to write flashbacks. I read a lot of literature with flashbacks in them. I think it's a interesting and useful mechanism, but I also think it can be overdone, and that some people use it as sort of as a way to get around telling the narrative. Uh, um, I don't even know how to describe it, but basically, what I'll say in my situation is that if I had tried to tell everything in flashback, there would have been a lack of coherency in terms of the timeline. It was necessary for me to say so much about what's happening is important that needs to be a central through line of the story, that needs to be woven into the timeline and the plot of the story, not just turned into flashbacks. And there are flashbacks in the book as well. But for me, I knew that if I wanted to tell that story completely, I had to ground it in a single POV, and I had to actually tell that story at the same time that I was telling the present day story. So that was kind of what drove that. And I think sometimes that can be the problem with flashbacks, is they can feel disconnected from the overall story. They can feel like almost like an info dump. Like, here, I want to tell you this cool thing that happened that really matters in the present day. So I'll like give you a flashback. And again, it can be done very effectively. But in the case of my book, if I had done that, a third of the book would have been flashbacks and would have been really annoying. So
As you were writing it, did you write sort of the way that it came out in the end, or did you approach it as writing the past timeline, writing the present timeline
so
separately?
this book was a departure from all the books I had written in the past, because I I've always been like a pretty intense. Do you guys know the terms plotter and pantser? Okay, right. So I had always been a really intense plotter. And I started writing this book because the book I had been writing before wasn't working. And I was like sick of everything and hated writing. And I was like, I'm just going to sit down and write some shit and see what happens. And so this book, for the first third of this book, it was just a bunch of like garbage nonsense. It was just like, and now I'm going to write about this person. And now I'm going to write this, which is actually going to end up being the third chapter of the book. And now I'm going to write this character who's a villain. And actually, I'm going to turn them into a good guy instead. And then it wasn't until I was like a third of the way into the book that I started really figuring out what the book was about. And then I wrote it more linearly. But I have, with this and the sequel and the third one, because the books follow specific POVs, there have been times where I've said, like, I'm going to skip talking about this person right now because he's really boring, and I'm just going to write the chapters for X person who I'm really interested in right now. And hopefully that distance will allow me to come back to the other storyline and say, oh, actually, you aren't that boring. I just need you. So I've since starting this trilogy, my writing style is still very plotter in that it's all planned out, but in terms of how I let myself write, I'm much more loosey goosey than I used to be.
That can actually have me cross off a question for later too, because one of the things I was going to ask was, is this trilogy mapped out? Sort of, do you know where it's going, or are you still finding things? But yeah, it sounds like the best possible combination of both.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've drafted the third one, and the second one comes out in like what, 3 weeks? Second one comes out in like 3 weeks. The first one I have a very, very bad rough draft. But what I will say about it is that the major beats are there and how it ends is there. So I do have a very firm understanding of like the overall arc of the trilogy and how it's going to end. Which, it was funny. I had a meeting with my publisher, my editor, to talk about book three, and she was like, "So first thing I want to know is like, do you know yet how these characters' stories ends? Because it is really common for people to go into a trilogy, particularly if their first book is bought and then the publisher says, we actually want a trilogy. It's really common for writers to go into that situation and sort of pull a Battlestar Galactica, where like they didn't know that the seasons would last this long and they had no plan for the end, and it shows, right? So my editor was actually very happy when I was like, yeah, this person ends like this and this and this and this, and the arcs are clear and it's satisfying, we're done. So but that's hard. That's hard to do.
Yeah. Well, now you just have the easy part of writing it. So
I know, I'm waiting for my edits back on the rough draft from my editor, and I'm like so excited because I know she's going to be like, okay, well, none of this made sense, but she's so smart. Tiana Coven, she's at Orbit. She like helped me transform book two and save book two from itself, and I know she's going to help me save book three from itself. And I know a lot of people like the idea of like having an editor is like terrifying, but if you can lean into the idea that this person loves your work and wants your work to be better, like it's the most rewarding, exciting part of revising and publishing for me, is sitting down with this really smart person who I respect and being like, okay, let's get this shit done. Let's figure this out. Let's do something cool here. That's really exciting.
awesome. And I definitely would like to talk a little bit more about sort of your relationship with Orbit and how that got started. But before then, I want to ask, and this is mostly me taking advantage of this opportunity as a complete nerd who loves the book. Is there anything that didn't make it into the book, but that you think is really interesting or cool about the world or the characters, but it just didn't quite fit into the finished product?
I mean, I have like pages and pages of world building notes and background information that only I know, that like probably half of it isn't even glimpsed in the book, right?
Oh, wow.
One of the things that I've been able to do a little bit more in book three, but I wish that I had been able to do more throughout the trilogy, is so there's three planets, or main planets, and then a couple small planets in the trilogy, and these different planets have different currencies and different languages and different ethnicities from each other. But also within those individual planets, there are different dialects, there are regional differences, there are, because that's how actual worlds are, right? This is something that science fiction often gets wrong, is they say, here's planet A where everybody is like X, and here's planet B where everybody is like, why? And we'll have those two planets have a culture clash. And isn't that interesting? It's like, yes, it's absolutely interesting. But you're forgetting that planet A has hundreds of cultures in and of itself. And so in my documents and in my head, all of that is there. But I
Oh,
get
wow.
like, I have like almost no opportunity to put that into the books that I'm writing in a way that is that feeds the plot rather than just being my own vanity, right? So one of the things that I want to do in the future with a future project is do more of that, like really explore the idea that like planets can be interacting with each other and those planets can have their sub issues and like yeah. So that's I on a different note, I will say that book two, there are multiple chapters that I wrote from the perspective of a specific character who I won't name and their past that did not make it into the final book. And there's those, I love those chapters so much, and they are just fascinating backstory to me. Maybe I'll find a way to like release them as short stories or something like that. I don't know. But they just didn't end up working in the book. But I think readers would have loved them.
I think that's such a great idea. I mean, short stories, novellas are such a great
Mhm,
way to explore those sort of little side stories that a lot of times I
mhm.
know that with the Expanse series that they had a couple of novellas
Yeah.
that were just really nice sort of extras. Um, so without giving too much away, because you did mention book two, can you tell us a little bit about what we can expect from it?
Yeah, so the thing about writing a sequel that is horrible and excruciating is that when you write a sequel, particularly if your first one has been loved by anybody, readers so often want the sequel to be like book one, right? Because book one is what they loved. So they want like book one 2.0, right? Um, but that's not actually what sequels do. Effective sequels expand the world. They take existing plot points from the first book and they take them in new ways, and they're often structurally different, and characters have changed and evolved and things like that. And so a big part of what book two is about, I would say, is what happens when we've had a huge political climax and we think it's over and it's not. That's what book two is about. And so it introduces whole new civilizations that have been impacted by the things that happened in book one. It writes characters who are dealing with the after effects of what happened in book one and not having the time to heal because they've been like slammed in the face with brand new, problems. Um, and so basically, it is about I will say that the story takes place in two places. There's two groups of characters that have like diverging narrative paths that then eventually will bring them back together. And in both those narrative paths, what those characters are trying to do is they're saying, okay, so we accomplished something. And now there are these after effects, and things aren't what we thought they would be. And the fight isn't over for us. What do we do now? And that's what book two is about.
Cool. I'm so
Yeah.
excited to read it.
I
I
hope you
can't
like
wait.
it.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited. You mentioned it's challenging to write a sequel for all of those reasons. Um, I'm curious if any of your experiences writing the first book influenced your approach. Like, did you change things up because of, I guess, either the reception or just your feelings after you finished it, or did anything about the process sort of go, oh, I should do this differently, or the same because it's so great for the second book?
It's funny. In the second book, I thought that I needed to. So the books are told from varying POVs. In book one is told from three POVs. Book two is told from four POVs. And initially, I thought well, I have to two has to be told from 3 POVs too. So I'm gonna cut this POV from book 1 and put in this new POV. And something about the book wasn't working. And one of the things my editor said is like, you need to bring that POV back. Like, we need that character. We love that character. They're essential to the story. Why would you get rid of them? Who cares if it's 4 instead of 3? Like, don't get caught up in the stupid, like, technical mechanics of the rule of 3. Give us 4 POVs. And I did, and the book was much stronger for it. So I don't know that that actually answers your question, but what I will say that I have learned is to not get trapped by the rules that your first book sets up, right? And this is another thing about writing a sequel, is you are in many ways constrained by the first one, but the sequel is also like, you can't let the first one trap the second one. And I spent a lot of time while drafting the second one really worried about the fact that it was completely different from the first one, and thinking, this won't work, people won't like this. And now I'm kind of like, yeah, some people won't like it. Like, I accidentally read a review the other day where someone was like, clearly did not like it and did not like the ways that it was different from the first one. It's like, yeah, that's going to happen. Some people are going to fucking love it, and some people are going to be like, this sucks. She was a one-hit wonder. I'm not interested anymore. I hope she never writes again. And I think I sort of learned that you can't let the ego and anxieties surrounding book 1 like strangle you while you're writing book 2. Or any project, even if it's not a series or a trilogy. Like, don't let one project strangle what you're doing with the next project, is what I would say.
Interesting. And that sounds like a very healthy approach.
It's a very healthy approach that I often fail at.
Yeah,
So
of course, it's always easier to say it, right? Than to,
yeah, it is always,
but it
and it's
sounds really
true.
good. So
I have, my mental health around my writing is much better than it was while I was waiting for the first one to be published. And I think that's just an experience of being a debut writer. I was much more stressed about book 1 than I am about book 2. So
anything in particular, like what changed,
there,
I guess, what helped you?
there was so much anxiety around, like, like, they made me change my title, right? And we went back and forth for a long time on titles. And I was just like, I hate this. I like my old title. I want to have a title like this. They're giving me ideas that I don't like, and blah, blah, blah. And like, yes, you want to have a title that you like. And in the end, I was satisfied with my title. I don't love the title of the first book. I love the title of the second book. But I'm at a point now where I'm like, who cares? Like, unless they call it like laser pointer pew pew pew, like, I'm fine. It there's the little things, and there's the feelings around, well, I have to make sure that I'm doing like tons of social media posts, right? Some people love to do that stuff. I don't. And frankly, it makes like next to zero difference in sales. Like, if you're going to do tons of social media around a book that you're publishing, like, do it because you enjoy it and you want to interact with people in that way. Like, that's why I do it. I'm not somebody who's going to get a TikTok account because, like, I can't dance about my book, right? But like, if you're someone who wants to dance about your book, like friends that I have who are huge TikTok performers, then like, do that. But I don't care as much anymore about like the sort of scrambling to figure out like, well, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? It's like, you write the book. The only thing you can control is writing the book. Everything else is out of your power. And I think realizing this, realizing that has a very salutary effect.
That's awesome. Um, and speaking of writing the book, maybe we can pivot into talking about writing. And we chatted about this just very briefly before we started, but can you share a little bit about your writing process and what a typical writing day or writing hour looks like for you?
Yeah, I mean, like, I can tell you a typical schedule, but like the actual writing set, they're so different every time. Like my typical schedule is like I get up early, I work early shifts so that I can be done with work as early as possible. I go to the gym so that I can listen to my audiobooks, so that I can be inspired by other stories. I come home, I make dinner, we eat dinner. I go upstairs and I write for like 2 hours. That's like the only, during the week, that's the only time I have. And in that 2 hours, I might be working on world building documents, like literally just like in my files, just coming up with shit. And other times I might be doing like Google research into things because I got caught in a rabbit hole about like what, garroting does to somebody, right? And then sometimes it really will be like the words just come and I'm just flying and I'm doing it. And then sometimes it's I can't write a sentence to save my life. So, the schedule is the same. And then I write much more on weekends. The schedule is the same. But like every session is different. And I know that like some people they don't schedule when they write, some people don't. Like, I don't have children right now. My son is out of the house. So I don't have I don't have the constraints of a child in the house. It's very, different if you do. I know a lot of parents who like they write really early in the morning. They're like up at 5 and they do a writing session between, 5 and 7. God bless them. I would die. But like that's part of why, I became a foster mom and only had one kid and I don't have other children because I wanted to have time to write. So so yeah, that would be, a typical writing schedule for me. I usually
Okay.
write at home, but on the weekends I go to coffee shops. So
Oh, okay. So you
yeah.
kind of get out of the environment
Yeah,
and
I try to. Yeah. If I went to a coffee shop though every night to write, I would spend too much money on coffee. So instead I write at home.
I hear that. Uh, you mentioned earlier Orbit and your editor. I'm curious sort of how you wound up with Orbit and what was that process like and why did you decide this is something that we've talked about with almost every author that we've met with, but the decision to self-publish versus go a more traditional route. So
Mhm.
really curious just to hear about the journey that took you there.
Yeah. So it is kind of a convoluted. So I always wanted to publish traditionally, but also for most of the time that I was coming up, there was this prejudice against self-publishing, right? It's not as serious, it's not significant, it's not real publishing. And so, infected by that prejudice, my plan was always to be a traditionally published writer. And because until very recently, I didn't have a writing community. I was the only writer I knew. I wasn't in communities of people who were self-publishing. There was nobody speaking into my ear saying like, you could self-publish and it would be really cool and it would be this and that thing. If you ask me why I don't self-publish now, it's because I don't have time to be my own marketer. Maybe if I ascend to like Brandon Sanderson level and don't want to deal with the ins and outs of publishing anymore, like I'll publish my own books because I won't have to market myself because people will just buy them and give me $1 million. Maybe someday that will happen. But now, as much as publishing is a dysfunctional industry and has lots about it that's very difficult, um, I would rather publish traditionally because then you are outsourcing all of the work. Like I'm not a publicist, I'm not an artist, I'm not a copy editor. I'm not, all of the, I can't, draw my own cover. I can't make my own maps. Like all of these things that self-published writers have to pay for themselves and do themselves. I don't have the time or the skills or the inclination to do that. When you publish traditionally, they do it for you. They do your marketing, they do distribution, they do all of that for you. And so, in terms of how I ended up at Orbit, so I entered a contest for a mentorship program called Pitch Wars. I was encouraged to enter it by a writer named Michael Meme, who I met, who read some of my pages, thought they were incredible, said, either send this to agents or join try to get into this program. I got into the program. I worked with an amazing editor named Jake Nichols. They have a company called Future Worlds Editing, and they're just fantastic. And I worked with Jake, and we revised the book. And at the end of this program, basically what happens is a showcase of agents come together and they look at the projects affiliated with this program. And through that, and through Mike, and getting the word out and getting the book out, I actually ended up getting, I think it was 5 offers of representation from different agents, which is not, and I don't say that to brag. I say that to say that, like, that's an unusual way to experience. Like, most people, they get their agents through like the slush pile. They just they cold query. And, so my experience was different. And I ended up getting like 5 offers really fast. Because once one offer goes, this is something to remember if you're going after an agent. If you get an offer of representation from an agent while your book is out with other agents, do not accept the offer. Ask for 2 weeks, go to the other agents and give them a chance to offer on it. Because that's what happened with me. Is I said, hey, I got an offer from this person. And then all these agents were like, hold on, give me a second, I'm going to read it. And they like read it over 2 days and were like, pick me. And so then I ended up like being able to choose. And the first agent who offered, like, I ended up determining that she actually wasn't the right fit for the book. And so that's why you don't take the first offer. But if nobody else wants it, you take the offer and you're happy because an agent is an agent. And while all this was happening, an editor at Orbit saw a tweet about my book. Her name is Priyanka Krishnan. And she said to Bridget, who had Bridget Smith, my agent, she said, hey, I just saw this tweet. This looks really cool. Send it to me. And so Bridget sent it. So this is part of why I picked Bridget, because she's very well known in the science fiction publishing. So she has these relationships with editors. It served me really well. She's seasoned, experienced. And like 4 months later, Orbit reached out and Priyanka was like, I got to have this book. And again, this was a situation where you go to all of the other editors and you say, hey, does anybody else want it? And in this case, the editors were like, I don't have time to read it. Sorry, but good luck. And it was like, okay, that's fine, because Priyanka was the one I wanted. So, that's a very long answer to your question, but it is a complicated question of how I got my book deal with Orbit.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating that you were able to kind of sidestep the query process and get right into it. But that's such good advice, I think, too.
I was very lucky to not have to cold query. Cold querying is so difficult, and I've known so many people who have succeeded at it, so they don't give up. But like, I did it with a previous book and it was horrible. So I was very glad that I didn't have to do it with this book.
And I do want to get to questions, so I don't want to take too much more time, but I'm curious if there are any other projects. Obviously, you have Ambitious World coming out October 6th,
15th.
15th.
Yeah.
So just a couple weeks, but aside from that, are there any other projects that you're working on that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, the third book, the final book in the trilogy, is coming out either at the end of 2025 or the beginning of 26. I'm not sure yet. There's another book that I've been working on off and on that I'll probably that basically is about a colony that has to contend with the authoritarianism of a sentient planet. And so the sentient planet thing has been done a few times at this point, but I'd like to think that I'm doing something new and interesting with it. So that's a book that I've been working on. I have this idea for another book that I've written a little bit about, where dead people are randomly reborn as gods. I've got like lots of ideas. But the other book that I'm hoping to finish after this trilogy, it's a departure. It's not a space opera. It's much closer to horror than what I've done so far. So I am definitely interested in broadening in terms of genre. This is the first space opera I ever wrote, was this book. And so I don't plan to like just write space operas for the rest of my life. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what if my publisher wants anything, and then I'll be able to tell you what my next project is.
Awesome. And when you said horror, I saw at least two people in the audience sort of sit up straighter. So
Yeah,
I
I
will
love horror. Yeah,
and it's perfect because we're getting into spooky season.
I know.
Um,
Favorite season.
I'll open it up. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask? Aaron, I see you nodding. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you for the detailed explanation of the how you got your book deal. I was going to
Yeah.
ask that, so
Yeah.
thank you. So on that note, though, oh gosh, this could get into a long thing, but I'm curious how you learned how to write, how long you have been writing for in general, and how long you have been writing on a schedule for.
That's a great question. So I learned to write by reading and writing. I had no formal training. I've never taken a creative writing course. I've read like one Stephen King book about writing, and I never did, an MFA or anything like that. No shade to those things at all. They are amazing for the people who do them. I was just never in a position to do them, so I was completely self-taught. That that's not as romantic as it sounds. Because it means that in many ways, I think I could have learned a lot sooner if I had had more formal training, but it's fine. I learned to read from writing. I learned to write from writing, and I learned to write from being a voracious reader. And I wrote my first book when I was 8. And it was essentially Chronicles of Narnia fan fiction. But it was a chapter book set in Narnia. That was my first book. So I've been writing forever. I've been writing my entire life. The first time I ever had to write to a schedule was the sequel to this series. So it was yeah, I mean, well, if we talk about my academic writing, right, I had to learn to write to a schedule when I was in grad school. So I wrote a dissertation, that was a process of like, this chapter's due this day, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But creative writing, I never had to do that until I got my book deal. I have learned that I can write much faster than I thought I could. But I have also learned that that I would benefit from more leeway, for more of a breather than traditional publishing. They want you to publish a book a year. That's very difficult to do. So yeah, so writing the sequel definitely came with all of the stressors of having to write to a schedule for the first time. That's a great question.
I love that you wrote your first book at age 8. That's when I wrote my first book as well. And it was Star Wars fan fiction. So
Nice. I'm a huge believer in fan fiction as a learning to write tool, and as a just the pure joy of reading and community tool. I love fan fiction.
same. I rediscovered it fairly recently, but we could have a whole nother session just talking about fan fiction. But for now, I see Adam, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks. Before I ask my question, I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed your book. I read it way back in like not January, June, July, something like that. I've had the sequel pre-ordered since I finished the first one, so I really enjoyed it. And I wanted to ask, who are your favorite authors out right now? Doesn't have to be sci-fi and fantasy, but who do you enjoy reading? Because I know when I read your book, it made me think about a lot. I love Seth Dickinson. He just came out with Exordia. I don't know if you've read that, but it's really good.
I haven't
So
yet. Is it good? Yeah, I want
it's
to read it.
amazing. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll just talk about recent writers because like I have huge influences in people like Octavia Butler and Stephen King and things like that. But I'll just talk about the people who are writing right now who I'm really enjoying. So some of them are pretty obvious, like Anne Leckie, Arkady Martine, N.K. Jemisin, Nnedi Okorafor. These are authors, modern giants of sci-fi and fantasy that I absolutely love. There are a ton of East Asian and trans writers right now who I'm absolutely obsessed with. Neon Yang is one. Yoonha Lee is one. So much of the best sci-fi and fantasy I think being written right now is being written by Asian writers. It's just like a phenomenal time to be reading Asian science fiction and fantasy. And then Rivers Solomon is an amazing like sci-fi horror fantasy writer who I find really inspiring. And so I wouldn't say that any of those are writers that I'm like trying to write like them. It's more like I see writing as like a conversation happening at a table, right? And you want to sit at the table and talk to these people and like you vibe with certain people's ideas and you share certain people's ideas, but like you're not trying to copy other people's ideas. You just want to be part of a conversation with them. And so that's how I think about writing, and the kinds of people that I'm drawn to are dealing with issues of politics. They're dealing with issues of social justice. They're dealing with issues of gender and sexuality. I joke that these days, if there's not something a little bit queer about it, I don't really want to read it, because I find that to be some of the most interesting fiction out there. So, as soon as we get off the phone, I'm going to be like, oh my God, why didn't I mention these, 10 people? But those are some of the people that are really influential to me right now.
Excellent. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. Anybody?
Don't be shy.
Yeah, we have a shy group tonight, apparently.
That's okay.
Except for people whose names begin with the letter A.
There you go.
Well, I will ask Bethany, if there's anything that you're currently reading. You mentioned authors, but so normally I would just ask for the last book you've read, but I have the feeling that there's probably more than one happening. So
yeah, so this is an interesting question to answer because I'm actually reading 3 books right now. One of them is an Icelandic novel called Shadows of Short Days, and because he's Icelandic, I can't pronounce his name and I don't have it in front of me. And so that is really interesting. It's sort of a weird like inner city spray paint is magic kind of thing, like very neo-noir, very fantasy infused magic, things like that. I love fantasy just as much as sci-fi, so these things. So I'm reading that. I'm actually currently rereading my first book in preparation to read the sequel, in preparation to revise the third one. So this is one of the things you don't think about when you write a series, is that you get to the third one and you can't fucking remember anything that happened in the first 2. And so like you write, there's so many like continuity errors and things like that. So I'm rereading my books to help me revise my third one. And then a book that I'm always reading right now, because it's just like pure like relaxation for me, is a romance novel that is based on Devil Wears Prada fan fiction called Truth and Measure. It's pure bubblegum pop. I love it so much. And I've listened to it probably 10 times because I just, it's my comfort food. So very different things that I'm looking at right
I love that. I usually have the same thing where I have like one book that I'm reading that I feel comfortable telling people about, and then one that's like my guilty pleasure, and I read them at the same
Yeah.
time so that I can
Yeah.
always,
No
if someone
guilt. You
asks,
just
"What are
gotta
you
own it.
reading?"
You just be like, yep, I'm reading that smutty Devil Wears Prada book. Like, just
I
own
love
it.
it.
I didn't even know that there was Devil Wears Prada fan fiction until I found this book. Like, I didn't know it was a thing, and it turns out it's a huge thing. So anyway,
If there's one thing
someone,
I've learned from AO3, it's that there's fan fiction for literally everything.
oh my God, everything. It's terrifying.
Everything.
Like,
We do have a question.
delightful. Yeah, I just saw that.
Yeah, in the chat. If you woke up tomorrow and there was an elephant in your backyard, what would you do?
I mean, my answer is very boring. I would call animal control. You know, like I would probably try to make sure that they had water, like see if there was a way for me to make water available to them. I would wonder if they were going to destroy my car. You know, I would think, well, my lawn is overgrown, so they have plenty to eat, but really I would probably just call animal control. So
Yeah, that's yeah.
yeah. If we have time, I haven't had a chance to do this before, but I've always wanted to do this, which I'd love to do a giveaway. And so, but in order to do that, how many of you are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
We
7,
have
8,
12.
12. Okay. Danny,
I think,
I'm
oh no,
gonna
wait,
leave you off because if you want a
11
signed
minus.
copy, I can give you. Okay, so basically what I'd like everybody to do is give me a number between 1 and 11, but you can't pick a number that the other person, that anyone else has said, and whoever picks the number in my head, I will give you a signed copy of either These Burning Stars or On Vicious Worlds. I'll mail that to you, unless you don't want it, in which case you don't have to join the competition. But if we want to do that in the everybody doing it in the chat. Negative 35.
3.33333333.
0.333333. Keep going. Is that everybody? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I can't tell if everybody's gone.
We've got also the president of the club in the chat. It looks like she
Okay.
is not. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. So we'll just assume that these are the people who actually want to join the contest. So Nicholas, my number was 4, so you won. So congratulations on winning. So if you want, what you can do is get my email address from Danny and just email me and tell me which book you want and your address, and I will mail it to you.
That's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. I came to this just looking to learn something new, so this is great. Thank you.
Great. You're welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you everybody for being here. These things, like I said before, are super, super fun. So
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for doing that. That was unexpected, but
yeah.
very much appreciated. And Nick, make sure you hunt me down because you know I'm bad at responding to things. But yeah, no, Bethany, I really can't thank you enough. I know you said you like doing it, but still really appreciate you taking the time, especially in the evening. I know you have limited free time, so just really appreciate you and thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who came. Really, yeah, appreciate all of you. So thank you.
Yeah, feel free to find me. I'm on the social medias, you know, horrible as they are, I am there. So feel free to follow me and stay in touch. And if you have questions about writing or publishing, you know, don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you guys so much for having me. This really was awesome. So thank you.
Thank
and
you.
buy my book so that they'll publish more of my books.
Yes,
so
and
I
I
can
will
quit my job.
I will include when we post to YouTube, I'll include a link to order it. I believe we also have a link to pre-order in our Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn posts, so you can find it there. If for some reason you don't follow the Creative Writing and Literature Student Society on social media, why not?
I do actually. I follow you guys on Instagram. I don't know if I follow you on Twitter, but I do follow
We-
you on Instagram.
To be completely honest, post the same thing across all the platforms. So if you've got us on one, yeah.
All right,
you're good.
perfect, perfect.
But yeah,
Yeah, she just Erin just said the Friday night right. Yeah, Danny told me about the Friday night right. I've never written with other people before, like creatively. I think it would scare me too much, but maybe someday I'll show up.
if anyone else is interested in writing with people, we do have Friday Night Write, which is every Friday from 8 to 10. It is a generative writing workshop. So you can come, we write for an hour and then we workshop in small groups. I already see some faces that I recognize from it. Another thing that's really exciting that CWLSS is doing coming up is Final Form Fridays. And that's for anyone who has a manuscript that they're getting ready to evolve into its final form. A little bit more of a traditional workshop where you bring what you've written in advance to go through it. But if anyone is interested in that, I know that signups are still available. It is a limited space, of course. So if you are interested, sign up sooner than later. And keep an eye out. We also have other author spotlights coming up and book clubs. If you haven't been to the last two book clubs, the last one was Slaughterhouse-Five, and it was the most fun I have ever had talking about Slaughterhouse-Five. Hands down, it was awesome. So make sure you keep an eye out. I believe for October, we're going to be doing something spooky with short stories. So, and sorry, Adam, you raised your hand. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just as a quick question for the manuscript one, the final, finalizing it.
Final Form Fridays.
Yeah, Final Form Fridays. How far along should you be in there? Because I have my main series of stuff, but I have a sci-fi book that I've been working on so it's only about a third of the way done. But do you need to have more of a closer to a draft, or what do you want to?
So
What's the
actually,
guidelines?
Ryan, are you still around?
Yep, I'm here. Yeah, third of draft would be fine. That's about as long as the manuscript as I have that I'd be bringing. So that'd be absolutely fine, Adam.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again, Bethany. Thank you for sitting here while I plugged all of the CWLS.
Absolutely, you guys are awesome.
And thank you all, and have a great rest of your evening for those who are on the East Coast, rest of your afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. And have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.